So you're all very welcome. They're well welcomed.
Right, okay, we're going to start by lighting up the lamps. Welcome everybody to our Magic Lantern show. And thank you very much, Hugh, for allowing us and even encouraging us to use and be at St Mary's, where Richard Collinson, one of the main characters in our story, is buried. But let's begin as every Victorian Magic Lantern show would have begun. Now, I have to say, this slide belonged to my great-grandmother, and the king would have been Edward VII. I've been waiting a very long time to use this slide. Now, most of the slides we're using tonight are around about 150 years old. So you'll forgive some of them if they're showing a little bit of sign of wear. We all do at that age. And so most of them, they're hand-painted, and bear that in mind. And some of the slides we've made from photographs for obvious reasons, and you'll understand when we get there. But as I say, most of the slides are genuine, mostly Victorian era, and hand-painted. And when you see them projected, the hand painting, I think, is just astonishing. So, we're going to say a few words about the Magic Lantern before we start. Now, most people here are either enthusiasts or have been bored to death by George or me talking about magic lanterns. But here's a very brief history for anyone lucky enough to be outside those two categories. The first form of projected image was probably observed by shadows on cave walls. And we know that they saw shadows because of the cave paintings that you find in caves. You can see the evidence of the way they flicker and move. And really, that was the only form of projected image that people saw for many hundreds of years. And the first published image we have is this, by Giovanni da Fontana from 1420. And in fact, he describes this as a nocturnal appearance for terrifying viewers. Now, clearly the device has no projection lens, so the image would have been very, very dim, but no doubt served its purpose. The image on the lantern is upright, and the projected image is upright too, so the optics are quite correct. So we move on for another 200 years to this man, Christian Huygens, and he is credited with inventing the magic lantern. Some of you who did physics at school may remember the name. He has several principles and all sorts of equations named after him, and he did understand the optics. And in fact, his father asked him to make this, and indeed, he wanted to frighten his guests. So Christian understood the lenses, he made the lantern, and so the lantern was born. Early lantern slides were long slides, and they're exactly what their name implies. I don't know if you can see, but this is a long, long slide. And they would have several images on them. Yep, there we go. Sometimes they were parade, or in this case,
what a relief.
And here's one more relevant to our story tonight.
Almost need the sailing band music for this.
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes they were a series of different images, And quite often it's very difficult for us to understand what the connection was. They're somewhat lost in history. So those are your early slides. The illuminant in those days would have been an oil lamp or even a candle. We would think that very, very dim nowadays, but it was a dark, dark world. There was no street lighting, very little spill from houses. So travelling lanternists with a lamp and giving a show, it really was magic. You could see an image. And a lot of people didn't see images in those days. Books and paintings were for very rich people. The odd stained glass window and pub signs, which had to have an image by law from the 1400s. So slides were entertainment, they were educational, and they brought the news. And the lanternists travelled round.
Right, you lot. I've got my beady eyes on you, especially those on the back row. So no barracking, please, because I've got terrible toothache.
Right, we'll go back to our main story. The search for Franklin. After the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 and the ending of hostilities in the USA, the British Navy remained virtually unchallenged on the high seas, apart from the odd skirmish. And that lasted for nearly 40 years.
Tar? What kind of tar? Well, cat tar.
So, of course, we had Rule Britannia. So, ruling the waves, the Admiralty turned its attention to other activities, such as mapping the world and exploring, particularly to polar regions. And off they went on expeditions, sailing around the world. You're now going to be the world, by the way, audience.
So here we are, a little sailing ship going off all around the world, calling into a port every now and again. Nice to see you. Off on our way again. Here we are. All around the world. Call in.
So, what were they asking? What lay beyond the southern oceans? And was there a navigable passage through the Canadian Arctic and past Russian Alaska, which would considerably shorten the trade route to the Pacific, the fabled Northwest Passage? Of course, understanding the heavens and the nature of the earth was very important to these Royal Naval explorers navigating the world. Yep. Yes, folks, the earth is round. Of all the polar expeditions, the most famous and the most disastrous was Sir John Franklin's. Sir John had fought at Trafalgar and was a veteran polar explorer. On a previous overland expedition to the north coast of Canada in the 1820s, he famously survived by eating his leather boots when starvation threatened. This slide is taken from a daguerreotype photograph that was taken in 1845 when our story begins. By then, Franklin was nearly 60 years old and fairly portly, hardly the vision of an intrepid explorer. And that was because almost certainly his main mission was not to find the Northwest Passage, but to pinpoint magnetic north. He was the foremost observer and recorder of magnetic readings in the Royal Navy. And the exact location of magnetic north, which, as I'm sure you all know, moves, was a prize worth having, as it results in very accurate navigation, and then Britain would continue to rule the waves. Astronomy alone was not enough. So in May 1845, two ships, the Erebus and the Terror, with Franklin in charge, set off from London, which is a good excuse to have a couple of slides of London. There's lots of publicity, cheering crowds. There we go, there's the tower. You remember the 2012 Olympics and Gloriana? It looks very like that, doesn't it? So eventually, yes, they did set off from London. Bear in mind, these are hand-painted. Look at the rigging. There were over 130 crew on board. They took enough provisions to last for 5 years, 7 at a stretch. Sir John himself had tinned potatoes in his cabin. In July 1845, they left the Whalefish Islands on the west coast of Greenland, where they'd restocked. A week or so later in Baffin Bay, they encountered 2 whaling ships from Peterhead and Hull. Then they entered the Canadian Arctic, and they were never seen again by their fellow countrymen. By 1847, 2 years later, the Admiralty was feeling uneasy. There had been no word back by the usual channels. Whaling vessels were frequently in Baffin Bay, and the Hudson Bay Company usually picked up news of expeditions. Now, the redoubtable Lady Franklin, Lady Jane Franklin, was also lobbying the Admiralty hard to send an expedition after them. Now, she was a remarkable lady, not least for the fact that she only ever allowed one image of her to be shown and printed in any newspaper. And this was it. It's a portrait of when she was 24. By 1847, she was 56. Ladies, take note. In 1848, 1 overland and 2 sea expeditions set out and explored around, but they came back with no news whatsoever. That's one of the sea expeditions. Then in 1850, no fewer than 5 expeditions set out, including one from the USA. And the 2 we are going to follow were led by Richard Collinson, our local, who came into the Arctic from the west, and by Horatio Austin with Erasmus Ommanney, who came in from the east. And it might be useful just to have a look at a map at this point. So here you have Greenland and Baffin Bay. So if you're coming in from the east, that's the Austin and Ommanney expedition. You came up Baffin Bay, and then you came in this stretch of water, Lancaster Sound. And basically, they were looking around this area for Franklin. But if you're coming in from the west, as Collinson did, Collinson quite remarkably sailed, no power assistance, all the way along here, the north coast of Canada, and got to that point there. So what had happened to Franklin? Bit of a spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you. He had indeed come up here and gone in via Lancaster Sound. He had then spotted that this stretch of water, very unusually, had melted. In those days, it melted about once in every 10 years. So he went down. And he got to this place, King William Island. And there he stayed. And guess what? He couldn't get back. So there was no way. Most of this area here was frozen all year round. And in fact, a great deal of the rest of it looks like lovely clear water, but it wasn't. And it still isn't to this day. A lot of this is frozen solid for year on year. So just if you can remember that map a little bit. So we've got Austin and Ommanney coming in here, and Collinson coming in along here. And that's where Franklin is, and that's where the ships have been found recently. That is Prince of Wales Island, which we'll slightly figure again. And if you see that great big inlet there, I'm very proud to say that's Ommanney Bay. For those of you who don't know, my maiden name is Ommanney. And actually, that bit there is Cape Collinson. So there we go. Anyway, back to our story. And the first person we're going to meet is Collinson. He set out first. And the reason is because, of course, he was coming in from the west. He had to go all the way around South America to Cape Horn and all the way back up to Alaska. So he had a long, long way to go. Now, Collinson was born in November 1811. He was the third son of the vicar of Gateshead, so he's born in Gateshead. And his family had no real connection with the Navy at all. One story I really like is that his mother was clearly a very lively lady, and someone described her as the only person he had known who successfully cultivated the extraction of sunshine from cucumbers. So there we go. He loved school, but his younger brother said later, his letters were a specimen of bad spelling and worse writing. And maybe he was just dreaming of something else. When Collinson was 12, Captain Mayling of the Royal Navy came to the area looking for a midshipman for HMS Cambridge, bound for the Pacific. His intended candidate turned him down, but Collinson volunteered. His enterprising mother arranged for his father's curate to go too, to teach the boys on board. And in fact, that curate ended up as a naval chaplain. He loved it. Anyway, Collinson went to many, many destinations. So there's the real ship. And he was sailing. Just note the lighthouses for future reference. In his Navy career, he served under Horatio Austin, and that's the same Austin leading the other expedition. And he made very good friends with Francis Beaufort, of Beaufort scale fame. And Beaufort was the Navy's chief hydrographer. That's the science of surveying and charting bodies of water. In 1839, Collinson was appointed by Beaufort to the post of surveying officer to the fleet with the Chinese War expedition. And that was the first Opium War. And Collinson's job was to mark the way for the large warships to navigate up channels. So he was right at the forefront of operations. He served with distinction and was awarded the Companion of the Order of Bath. And that brings us to January 1850. Collinson was very familiar with the Pacific waters and was given command of the expedition in search of Franklin entering the Arctic from the west, as I've explained. There were two ships, Collinson in HMS Enterprise and Robert McClure in HMS Investigator. They left Plymouth on the 20th of January 1850. Now, McClure is an interesting character. His first cousin was the mother of Oscar Wilde, and he'd already been on an unsuccessful expedition to find Franklin in 1848. Then he was rapidly promoted so he could take command of the Investigator. So off they went, and this was a very long and difficult journey across stormy seas. Well, so they sailed on, and the two ships met off Tierra del Fuego, the southernmost tip of South America. McClure argued with his officers most of the time, and partly as a result, he lost his main masts in a storm. He was therefore very delayed reaching their next rendezvous point, Honolulu. When he eventually arrived, he discovered Collinson had left the previous day. McClure then hatched a bold and risky plan to outmaneuver his senior officer. He sailed straight through the treacherous Aleutian Islands rather than round them as recommended, and he arrived first at Point Barrow, Alaska, the western entry point to the Canadian Arctic. He persuaded the waiting naval vessels that Collinson had already entered and they'd missed him. Anyway, he said, the priority was to reach Franklin as soon as possible, so they reluctantly let him go. By the time Collinson did arrive, 2 weeks later, it was too icy to enter the Arctic. So he retreated and he spent the winter in a place he knew very well indeed. Hong Kong. No. McClure and Collinson never actually met up again on this expedition. Meanwhile, let's meet our other searcher, and he is my great-great-great-uncle Erasmus. And Eddie there, it's his great-great-great-great-great-uncle Erasmus. Unlike the Collinsons, my father's family were Navy through and through. There'd been an Ommanney on the Navy list from the early 1700s right up to the death of my own father in 1977. Erasmus's own grandfather and two uncles were admirals. He was born in May 1814 in London, and he joined the Navy at the age of 12, which was not unusual. Remember, Collinson had as well. At the grand old age of 13, he was in the Battle of Navarino, when in 1827, a combined fleet from Britain, France, and Russia, what an alliance, with much encouragement from the poet Lord Byron, defeated the Ottoman and Egyptian fleet over the issue of Greek independence. This was the last significant naval battle fought under sail, and Erasmus was right in the thick of it, aboard HMS Albion, the ship of his uncle, Sir John Ommanney. This portrait, which we have, and this is a photograph, is Erasmus as a lieutenant in his 20s. About this time, he volunteered to join an expedition to rescue a number of whalers stuck in ice in Baffin Bay. It was a very dangerous mission, and Erasmus received the special commendation of the Admiralty for his part in it. From that time until we pick him up at the expedition, let's get that right, he served in various places, but most particularly, he served in the Mediterranean, where his uncle had now become the chief naval officer. I think this is in Alexandria, this particular slide. And very importantly, he met and made friends with a number of other naval officers, including Horatio Austin, and a whole bunch of them that turned up on the same expedition. So when Horatio Austin was asked to put together an expedition to rescue Franklin, he asked for Erasmus as his second in command. The Austin expedition comprised two sailing ships, the Resolute commanded by Austin and the Assistance commanded by Erasmus Ommanney. They had a crew of 60 each. And then there were two steam tenders, the Pioneer and Intrepid. There's 180 men in total. And among the officers was the lineup of old friends from the Mediterranean. On the 3rd of May 1850, Erasmus entertained Lady Franklin and showed a number of dignitaries around his ship. And on the 4th of May, the expedition set off from London. By the 28th of May, they'd sighted Greenland. They stopped in Cape York, and here they took on an Inuit man, and I'm not even going to attempt his proper name. They called him York. It was much easier to say. Erasmus has a huge respect for York and never ignored his advice and opinion, including on what to eat. Avoid polar bears was his advice. And that's almost certainly part of the reason this was an extremely healthy expedition. Erasmus's own... No, I'll tell you that later. So on the expedition travelled into the Arctic. And at that point, we're going to take a break, you'll be pleased to hear. So before we all get too cold in the Arctic.
of ice cold wine.
Yeah.
Hello, George.
George.
I think they'll bring it round.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. That's perfect.
The ships are actually the right ships. They're paintings of the right ships.
Not necessarily, no.
Some of them, any of them.
Some of them are.
Some of them are, yeah.
I usually say if they are.
Yeah, yeah.
But generally speaking, they're just ships of. There is a set of slides that includes Erasmus, but I haven't got it. I've never seen it, nor has anybody. No. Are you enjoying it? Yeah, good.
Lovely, isn't it, George?
Yeah.
It's a bit of a slow burn. That's right. It's terrific. And Lynn didn't come actually because Jane's not feeling She had to lie down before we got in the car.
Oh no. Oh well, it's good to see you anyway, Jen. I haven't seen you for ages. Oh yes. Oh, I have to turn myself off.
There once was a sailor who was posting on the quay. Oh, I was aboard of the Golden Vanity when she was held in chase by a Spanish piracy, and we sunk her in the lowlands low. In the lowlands, lowlands, and we sank her in the lowlands low. Oh, we had aboard of us a little cabin boy who said, "What will you give to me, the galley I destroy? Oh, ye can wed me daughter, she is me pride and joy, if you sink her in the lowlands low." In the lowlands, lowlands, if you sink her in the lowlands low. So the boy bared his breast and he plunged into the tide, and he swam until he came to the rascal pirate's side. He climbed on deck and went below, by none he was espied, and he sunk him in the lowlands low. In the lowlands, lowlands, and he sunk him in the lowlands low. He bore with his auger, he bore it once and twice, and some were playing cards and some were playing dice, and the water flowed in and bedazzled their eyes, and he sunk them in the lowlands low. In the lowlands, lowlands, and he sunk them in the lowlands low. Then the cabin boy did swim o'er to the starboard side, saying, "Captain, take me up, for I am drifting with the tide. I will sink you, I will kill you, if you claim me child as bride. I will sink you in the lowlands low. In the lowlands, lowlands, I will sink you in the lowlands low." Then the captain boy did swim all to the larboard side, saying, "Shipmates, set me up, for I am drowning with the tide." They hauled him up so quickly, but on the deck he died, and they buried him in the lowlands low. In the lowlands, lowlands, and they buried him in the lowlands low. Here's a Curse upon the captain, wherever he may be, for taking that poor cabin boy so far away to sea, for taking that poor cabin boy so far away to sea, and to leave him in the lowlands low. In the lowlands, lowlands, and to leave him in the lowlands low. In the lowlands, lowlands, and to leave him in the lowlands low.
To me way, hey, blow the man down.
The skipper says he let the weather be hanged.
Oh, give me some time to blow the man down. Blow the man down, bullies, blow the man down. To me way, hey, blow the man down. Blow him right back into Liverpool town. Oh, give me some time to blow the man down.
As I was walking down Paradise Street,
to me way, hey, blow the man down.
A saucy young damsel I happened to meet.
Oh, give me some time to blow the man down. Blow the man down, bullies, blow the man down. To me way, hey, blow the man down. Blow him right back into Liverpool town. Oh, give me some time to blow the man down.
I says to her, Polly, and how do you do?
To me way, hey, blow the man down.
Says she none the better for seeing of you.
Oh, give me some time to blow the man down. Blow the man down, bullies, blow the man down. To me way, hey, blow the man down. Blow him right back into Liverpool town. Oh, give me some time to blow the man down.
It's sailors, it's tinkers, and tailors, it's men.
To me way, hey, blow the man down.
We're all of us coming to see you again.
Oh, give me some time to blow the man down. Blow the man down, bullies, blow the man down. To me way, hey, blow the man down. Blow him right back into Liverpool town. Oh, give me some time to blow the man down.
Was you ever in Quebec, launching timber on the deck, where you break your blooming neck, riding on a donkey? Way, hey, and away we go, donkey riding, way, hey, and away we go, riding on a donkey. Was you ever down Mobile Bay, screwing cotton all the day? $1 a day is a white man's pay, riding on a donkey. Way, hey, and away we go, donkey riding, way, hey, and away we go, riding on a donkey. Was you ever in Canton, where the men wear pigtails long, and the girls play honky-tonk, riding on a donkey? Way, hey, and away we go, donkey riding, way, hey, and away we go, riding on a donkey. Was you ever in London town, where the gals, they do come down, see the king in a golden crown, riding on a donkey? Way, hey, and away we go, donkey riding, way, hey, and away we go, riding on a donkey. Was you ever down Frisco Bay, where the gals all shout hooray. Here comes Johnny with his 3 years' pay, riding on a donkey. Way, hey, and away we go, donkey riding, way, hey, and away we go, riding on a donkey. Way, hey, and away we go, donkey riding, way, hey, and away we go, riding on a donkey.
Whiskey for me, Johnny. Oh, whiskey makes me pull it low. Whiskey, Johnny. And whiskey gave me this red nose. Whiskey for me, Johnny. Oh, whiskey killed me, poor old dad. Whiskey, Johnny. And whiskey drove me mother mad. Whiskey for me, Johnny. Whiskey up and whiskey down. Whiskey, Johnny. And whiskey all around the town. Whiskey for me, Johnny. What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor early in the morning? Hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises early in the morning. Put him in the longboat until he's sober, put him in the longboat until he's sober, put him in the longboat until he's sober early in the morning. Hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises early in the morning. Pull out the plug and wet him all over, pull out the plug and wet him all over, pull out the plug and wet him all over early in the morning. Hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises early in the morning. Put him in the scuppers with a hosepipe on him, put him in the scuppers with a hosepipe on him, put him in the scuppers with a hosepipe on him early in the morning. Hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises early in the morning. Heave him by the leg in a running bowling, heave him by the leg in a running bowling, heave him by the leg in a running bowling early in the morning. Hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises early in the morning. Put him in bed with the captain's daughter, put him in bed with the captain's daughter, put him in bed with the captain's daughter early in the morning. Hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises early in the morning. Shave his belly with a rusty razor, shave his belly with a rusty razor, shave his belly with a rusty razor early in the morning. Hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises early in the morning. That's what we'll do with a drunken sailor, that's what we'll do with a drunken sailor, that's what we'll do with a drunken sailor early in the morning. Hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises early in the morning. Hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises early in the morning.
fish of the sea, and we're bound for the Rye of Ran. And away, boys, away, away, Rye, so very well, my bonny young gal, and we're bound for the Rye of Ran. Sing goodbye to Sally and goodbye to Sue, way, Rye, and all them we're leaving, it's goodbye to you, and we're bound for the Rye of Ran. And away, boys, away, away, Rye, so very well, my bonny young gal, and we're bound for the Rye of Ran. Our ship is sailing way over the bar, way, Rye, we pointed our nose to the old southern star, and we're bound for the Rye of Ran. And away, boys, away, away, Rye, so very well, the bonny young gal, and we're bound for the Rye of Ran. The oak and the ash and the bonny birch tree, way, Rye, they're all growing green in the old country, and we're bound for the Rye of Ran. And away, boys, away, away, Rye, so very well, me bonny young gal, and we're bound for the Rye of Ran. And away, boys, away, away, Rye, so very well, me bonny young gal, and we're bound for the Rye of Ran. In South Australia I was born.
Heave away, haul away,
South Australia round Cape Horn.
and we're bound for South Australia.
All away, you rolling king.
Heave away, haul away,
All away, you'll hear me sing.
we're bound for South Australia.
As I walked out one morning fair,
Heave away, haul away,
there I saw Miss Nancy Blair.
and we're bound for South Australia.
All away, you rolling king.
Heave away, haul away,
All away, you'll hear me sing.
we're bound for South Australia.
I shook her up, I shook her down.
Heave away, haul
I
away,
shook her all around the town.
we're bound for South Australia.
All away, you rolling king.
Heave away, haul away,
All away, you'll hear me sing.
we're bound for South Australia.
There's just one thing that grieves my mind.
Heave away, haul
To
away,
leave Miss Nancy Blair behind.
we're bound for South Australia.
All away, you rolling king.
Heave away, haul away,
All away, you'll hear me
we're
sing.
bound for South Australia.
Oh, one more pull and that'll do.
Heave away, haul away,
We're the boys to kick her through.
we're bound for South Australia.
All away, you rolling king.
Heave away, haul away,
All away, you'll hear me sing.
we're bound for South Australia.
One Friday morn when we set sail on a ship not far from land, we there did espy a fair pretty maid with a comb and a glass in her hand, with a comb and a glass in her hand. While the raging seas did roar and the stormy winds did blow, and we jolly sailor boys were up aloft, and the landlubbers lying down below, and the landlubbers lying down below. Then up spoke the captain of a gallant ship, who at once our peril did see. I have married a wife in fair London town, and this night she a widow will be, and this night she a widow will be. While the raging seas did roar, and the stormy winds did blow, and we jolly sailor boys were up aloft, and the landlubbers lying down below, and the landlubbers lying down below. And then up spoke the little cabin boy, and a fair-haired boy was he. I I've a father and mother in fair Portsmouth town, and this night they will weep for me, for me, for me, and this night they will weep for me. While the raging seas did roar, and the stormy winds did blow, and we jolly sailor boys were up for love, and the land was flying down below, 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 and the land was flying down below. Then 3 times round went our gallant ship, and 3 times round
Come past me, yeah.
for the want of the lifeboat they bore.
Yeah, not too bad, yeah.
All right, if you don't turn up at church, don't worry.
The bottom of the sea, while the raging seas did roar, and the stormy winds did blow, and we joyed sailed for our
Sit down.
Yeah, I'm going to ask everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, could you take your seats for the next half?
Is the music that would have been heard with it, or what you just
I didn't know if there was music down. Maybe they'll get the idea. Maybe. What do you think? Oh, sorry.
Lost onto it. You could all sit down now, please.
So I'm trying to get an extra seat in. So I need space to come through.
Thank you very much. You're right there, isn't it? Right, we'll begin the second half with a little taste of life in the Arctic. And we're going to show you a series of slides. And the music we're going to play is a very well-known folk tune, Lady Franklin's Lament.
'Twas homeward bound one night on the deep, swinging in my hammock, I fell asleep, and I dreamed a dream, I thought it true, concerning Franklin and his gallant crew. With 100 crewmen he sailed away across the frozen ocean in the month of May, to seek that passage around the pole where we poor crewmen do sometimes go. On mountains of ice his ship was drove, on the frozen ocean his men did go, where the Eskimo in his skin canoe was the only one that ever got through. In Baffin Bay where the whalefish blow, the fate of Franklin no man may know. The fate of Franklin no voice can tell, save that on earth my Franklin do dwell. Now my burden it gives me pain, for my long lost Franklin I cross the £10,000 I'd freely give to know that Franklin on earth
Okay. Well, we left both expeditions on the brink of going into the Arctic, and we're now going to go back to the Austin expedition in the late summer of 1850. They're sailing west into the Canadian Arctic, and I'm going to draw on Erasmus's own journal, which is held at the Glenbow Institute in Calgary in Canada. And the four of us Aucklands visited some years ago, and they let us handle the original because we were relatives, and it was a real thrill. Anyway, on August the 23rd, 1850, Erasmus led the party that found the first remnants of the Franklin expedition. Close to this beach, I discovered the traces of an encampment consisting of 3 circular tents. He then goes on to Beechey Island, where he finds an empty cairn. Now, I should explain, before reading the next bit, that a cairn is a mound of stones, and the custom was to leave a message or supplies for following expeditions. And you built your cairn of stones somewhere really prominent so somebody would see it. And this worked really well in the Arctic. But this one, they took it apart and there was nothing in it. And Erasmus says, the ground was searched in all directions. One more preserved meat tin was found of a larger description than the others, the name of Goldner on it. And this too is significant. The Franklin expedition had abandoned a lot of their tinned food. And Goldner tins were found to be of rather inferior quality and may have led to the lead poisoning effects shown in some of the bodies found. But that almost certainly was not the only cause of death. Scurvy and other things, and the Arctic debility, which I'll get on to, was another. And Erasmus found the remains of a magnetic observatory. One of the enduring mysteries of the Franklin expedition is that they took with them 200 cylinders for leaving messages, and only one has ever been found. And that was much later on. Anyway, by now, next slide please. The gathering pack ice was bringing all the expeditions in the area together, and Erasmus shared his finds. The group went on to find 3 graves on Beechey Island, still there today, and these are 3 of Franklin's men. By the end of September, the Austin expedition was frozen in for the winter. They were now at Griffith Island, fairly far west, in fact as far west as anyone had gone. And we're just going to show you a rather beautiful watercolour. Again, this is a photograph. And that is HMS Assistance in the ice. And it's something of artistic license, I think, because you made really sure that you, when you got stuck for the winter, you were as upright as you possibly could be. So this next slide is going to show how you coped. So if you notice, the main deck has been covered with canvas. They haven't parked too well either, this lot. There's one that's done better. And you cleared all the deck and covered it with canvas, and that was then an exercise area. Although in the case of HMS Assistance, it had another purpose, which I'm going to get on to next. So there they are, 180 men living in very close quarters and in danger of losing heart. And what do you do? And this is where the Austin expedition was spectacularly successful. The secret to success was keeping everyone busy and entertained during the long, cold and extremely dark winter. A form of severe depression known as Arctic debility was a very real threat to life. The Austin expedition had a theatre on board HMS Assistance, so under the canvas was Theatre Land. It was called the Royal Arctic Theatre. They had a casino on the Resolute, and the Resolute ran 2 masked balls. No shortage of women, by the way. The Navy loved dressing up as women. a full orchestra, and they had regular salons of entertainment, and of course they had magic lantern shows. They produced a regular newsletter, the Aurora Borealis, and a monthly glossy, the Illustrated Arctic News. And there's a facsimile of that on the table at the back if you want to have a glimpse later. They took a printing press. The excuse was to print messages to send off in balloons, giving their coordinates, so anyone from the Franklin expedition receiving the messages could find the rescuers. They did send off the messages, and they also captured an Arctic fox and sent a message off with him. But they also printed playbills. Now, here we go. And you'll notice the manager of the theatre is Captain Ommanney here. And this is the opening night, 9th of November. And I'm going to read you a bit from Erasmus's journal about the theatre. All busily occupied with our theatre, which is to be opened under the name Royal Arctic. To commemorate the day, an extra allowance of grog and provisions were issued. At 6 o'clock, the doors were opened and every seat was immediately filled. The commander arrived in state, drawn in a covered sledge constructed by his own men. They brought him alongside in gallant style. The decorations and chandeliers were tastefully executed and, when lit up, most brilliant. The backdrop by Lieutenant Brown received much applause. The effect was extraordinary, considering he had but 3 colours to work with. The band was composed of resolute and armed men. I'm just going to break off a second. Lieutenant William Brown, when he returned to the UK, he painted a panorama, an Arctic panorama, in Leicester Square, and it was a very popular place to go for many years. He was an extremely good artist. Back to the Royal Arctic Theatre. Here is Erasmus's account. After the overture, I appeared on stage in court dress and spoke the prologue. Afterwards, I played the part of Mrs. Crank in Did You Ever Send Your Wife to Camberwell? There we go. Which went off with a eclat. Now, I might say here, I have got a copy of this, and it's at the back, and it's a real Whitehall farce. You know, it's got the 2 doors, it's got the lot. All the senior officers played the women. Mrs. Crank even had a baby. And clearly, they were just such good friends, and this kind of, you know, heightened the entertainment of the evening, I suspect. Nothing could exceed the success which attended the opening of the theatre, quite repaid the trouble of setting it up. It was quite an eventful day in the annals of Arctic history. The gratification of creating amusement, mirth, and good feeling throughout the expedition was not the least important result. A more merry collection could not possibly be met with. Continued bursts of laughter prevailed throughout the evening. He then reveals that the temperature outside the ship was minus 22 centigrade, I've converted for you, and it was minus 9 centigrade among the audience. So if you think you're cold, you're not. Erasmus reports the next day. Everyone is full of the theatre and highly delighted with its success and the satisfaction it afforded. During an Arctic winter, cheerfulness is one of the best antidotes against ill health and discontent. Now, the next slide is again a photograph, and it shows a production of the 28th of February. The productions went on during the whole of the winter. And this is a photograph of a silk playbill. It's printed on silk, and it's from the ship. And you'll notice here, the main production is Charles XII, slightly more serious for this lot. Most of them are farces. Charles XII was a king of Sweden. You'll see Erasmus is in it, no? And you'll see here, it says, after which, grand phantasmagorical magical figures. That is a magic lantern show. And then they have the new pantomime of Zero. And the pantomime was written by one of the ship's surgeons, Charles Ede. And if we look at the next slide, this is a scene from it. This character here is Erasmus. And this character here is Frederick Crabbe. And Frederick Crabbe was the magic lanternist on board. He'd gone as second master, but he was so good with the magic lantern that the next expedition out took him on to do just that. And this chap here is Charles Ede, who wrote the pantomime. So it's fantastic. We've got a threesome there. That's in the Illustrated Arctic News. They got the T-shirt. You could take your silk shirt to the printer on board and he'd print you the playbill on your silk shirt. So you could get the T-shirt. And one of the junior officers took his leather jacket and had it printed on that. That leather jacket is now in the National Maritime Museum. Right. But of course you had other entertainments. And one of those was, as I said, the mass ball. They did also have lots of educational classes, I might say, and sing-alongs, so even the officers had to keep fit. Magic lanternists love these kind of slides because you can just go on and on and on. Now, this expedition became known as Austin's Happy Family. And one of the midshipmen aboard, Sir Clements Markham, he was only a midshipman in the Assistance. He was later president of the Royal Geographical Society. And he said, of all the Arctic expeditions, Captain Austin's was the happiest, the healthiest, the best administered, and the most successful. Can we say more? However, eventually daylight returns, and on April the 15th, 4 parties, totalling 15 sledges, set out in different directions. And each sledge had a flag, which was an innovation. I mean, obviously it did morale good, because you knew your sledge and you felt a bit of allegiance to it, but also it had another purpose. If the men focused on the flags, they avoided snow blindness. Although eventually Erasmus himself concluded that tinted glass was the only real answer to this problem. So the sledges set off, and Erasmus alone went 400 miles in 60 days. And together, the sledges mapped over 1,200 miles of new land in the time that they went. They were all back by July. So they had achieved something. They'd done a huge amount of mapping in the Canadian Arctic. And as I pointed out earlier, as a result, there is an Ommanney Bay. However, they found absolutely no trace of Franklin, nothing, or hint of which direction he'd taken. So Austin and Ommanney decided to return home in 1851 in the summer. And they arrived 2 weeks before the Great Exhibition of 1851 closed. They were all given tickets to go to the Great Exhibition. It was, yeah. And then it moved to Crystal Palace. Meanwhile, we have left McClure in the Arctic and Collinson about to go into the Arctic, having overwintered in Hong Kong. Both McClure and Collinson explored the western and mid-Arctic, never meeting up, but successfully communicating via cairns and messages in cairns. By the winter of 1852, McClure was in desperate trouble. The Investigator was stuck in ice on Banks Island, and the ship was being crushed by ice. And this is the actual, is a slide of the Investigator. Now, fortunately, HMS Assistance and Resolute had returned to the Arctic in 1852 under new commanders, and a sledging party from them spotted the Investigator. So they were rescued, and the crew sledged east to a waiting ship, the North Star, to safety and home in 1854. So they had actually completed a form of the Northwest Passage, though they're partly on foot and via a rescue party. However, they successfully claimed the £10,000 reward, which was a huge amount of money in those days, for doing so, and they got a great deal of kudos. Meanwhile, Collinson in the Arctic sailed further east to Cambridge Bay, where I showed you on the map, and where he was within 30 miles of where Franklin had come to grief. He picked up some wooden fragments from Erebus and Terror, but found nothing more. Collinson too took a library and encouraged theatricals on board. The Beggar's Opera was one, rather more highbrow than my relation Erasmus's productions, and he didn't appear in them himself. During the winter of 1852-3, he organised the construction of a bowling alley and a billiard table out of ice, which were very popular indeed. So after 3 winters in the Arctic, he finally left Barrow Point. He had tried to get out the year before, but got iced in just before he got far enough west. And he arrived home to a wave of indifference. It was May 1855. All interest now was on the Crimean War. McClure had already claimed the Northwest Passage prize, and Collinson had not really found any more information about Franklin. He had spent 3 winters in the Arctic, fallen out with all his officers. He was eventually persuaded not to court-martial the lot. Well, you try living for 5 years with the same group of people in a ship. However, Collinson's feat of sailing with no power assistance along the treacherous north coast of Canada and back again, with no damage to his ship, is absolutely extraordinary. Roald Amundsen, the Norwegian explorer who finally did navigate the Northwest Passage in 1906 on a steamship, described Collinson as one of the most capable and enterprising sailors the world has ever produced. So that's the man buried in our churchyard. So what happened to our intrepid explorers? Well, Collinson was so fed up with the Royal Navy, he never took up another naval post, although he was promoted to admiral. Soon after he returned from the Arctic, his father died, and he moved his mother and sister to Ealing. They bought a house called the Haven, and then found it was in fact on Haven Green. He became a church warden at Christchurch. He was on the building committee for St John's, where he subsequently became a church warden, and he was on Ealing Council. In 1875, he became the deputy master of Trinity House, responsible for lighthouses. He was essentially the man in charge. The master was the Duke of Edinburgh, Alfred, second son of Queen Victoria. During his time as deputy master, Trinity House achieved three significant things: establishing standard sounds for foggy weather, sound signals, I'll get my words right in a minute, building and replacing a number of lighthouses, including this one, which is the Eddystone, to replace Smeaton's Tower off Plymouth, and standardising the types of buoy that mark shipping channels. However, at the end of his life, scurvy returned, and eventually it led to his death in 1883 at the age of 71. And he is buried with his mother and sister in the churchyard here with the inscription, "And so he bringeth them to the haven where they would be." Erasmus Ommanney, meanwhile, he returned to active service in the Crimean War in the White Sea off the northern part of Russia. It's not a part of the Crimean War we hear about much. This is the Baltic Fleet at the time. He rose to the rank of full admiral and became a man of letters, Fellow of the Royal Society, Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, Fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society. He was made a Knight Commander of the Order of the Bath, as was Collinson, and he was one of Lady Franklin's pallbearers when she died in 1875. As he lived to the age of 90, dying in 1904, he became the grand old man of polar exploration, advising Shackleton and Scott. I like to think that Shackleton rescued the banjo from his sinking ship in preference to more useful-looking things, bearing in mind Erasmus's advice. Keep them entertained. So, what of Franklin? The only thing we know for certain is that he died on the 11th of June, 1847, off King William Island. And we know that because this ship, the Fox, with Leopold McClintock, who was Erasmus's second in command on the Assistance, went in search and found the only cairn with a message on King William Island, and it gave details of Franklin's death. They also found other remains, and this slightly gruesome one. This was a boat with skeletons in, again on King William Island. Bizarrely enough, they also found a quantity of plate silver and all sorts of things that were completely useless on board. So one suspects that the crew were not entirely in their right minds at the end. That boat is actually also in the National Maritime Museum. It used to be on display, but it's not now. So within the last 10 years, both of Sir John Franklin's ships have been found, the Erebus in 2014 and the Terror in 2016. They're actually in remarkably good condition because they've been frozen much of the time in the ice. And perhaps they might hold some of the answers to the myths and mysteries that have surrounded Franklin's ill-fated voyage. The Arctic is a very treacherous place, but also one of beauty, mystery, and magic. So we wanted to leave you with a more cheerful image tonight. This is actually Lapland, that side of the Arctic, and it was a very, very popular image in Victorian times. And with that, we say... Thank you. I don't know if anybody's got any burning questions. Less. They'd been looking for them. In actual fact, the Inuit knew where they were all the time, but people have misunderstood what they were indicating. And eventually somebody thought, Parks Canada actually thought, oh, we'll listen to them, we'll go and have a look. And then they found them. Yeah, and there they were. They're not very deep. They're only in about 30 metres of water. Yeah.
30 feet.
I think that's it. Well, they used to show above the water, but they haven't for many years. Yeah. They're coloured. Yeah. But if we got it right, they've been very nice to solve. Well, they were.
Okay.
Well, polar slides became very, very popular with the Franklin expedition, and there are lots of sets. It's very hard to pinpoint exactly which expedition belongs to which slides. We know the Fox, we know the Investigator because it's written on, and we know Sir John Franklin because the daguerreotypes were very recently sold at Sotheby's, weren't they? £500,000, yeah.
They're so real. 14 daguerreotypes. There are only 2 sets ever taken.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's still very popular. There was a painted photograph of my ancestor Erasmus, and it was on an auction site for 40 to 60 quid, and it went for 1,000. I know. So there's a lot of interest in this, yeah.
Well, I suppose with Parks Canada finding them as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the other thing is they can only dive from the 3rd week in August to the 2nd week in September, so they've got a very narrow window.
It's still very, very icy up there. Yeah.
And so it's a very protected site.
Yeah.
And of course it's in First Nation territory these days, so it all has to be agreed with the locals.
There's one bit I love. Erasmus went off on his sledging expedition, 400 miles he went, and you read his journal, and his main bit of advice is, do not take wolf skin to sleep on. The hair comes off in your mouth. So there we are. There's your bit of advice from Erasmus to today. Yeah.
I may have answered the question there and I didn't hear it. You were going to explain about polar bears and why we should eat them.
The livers are poisonous, and some other bits are not that good for you. And the Inuit York strongly advised against them, and they never killed a polar bear. That expedition never hunted polar bears. You may have to revise your menu. Yeah. The York is a very interesting character. He is treated with huge deference by this crew, and when they tried to drop him off back home, when they sailed home, he wouldn't go. And he stayed. My ancestor Erasmus, he adopted him and he had him educated and he became a missionary. But he just wouldn't go home. He was so much part of the crew there's one lovely story where there was obviously one young officer who was particularly good at playing the ladies in the productions. And the next morning after the production, the York was going around trying to find this one poor woman on this voyage. And they had to quietly explain that actually it was a man. But they loved him. They really loved him. It's very interesting.
Why the officers played with him and the lower ranks didn't? Is there anybody else?
I think they only did that in the first production to encourage everybody to sort of take part. But they took a whole set of costumes from a West End costumier, a theatrical costumier. So they had plenty of costumes, and they had absolutely no problem finding women. At the masked ball, there's a picture in the facsimile of the masked ball, and there are as many women in there as there are men. That is the Navy for you. Even I remember as a child that the naval officers loved dressing up as women as well. I'm not going to comment further. But there's Erasmus leading the way. He's the captain of the ship. Clearly doesn't do anything against morale, because they really were an extraordinarily happy bunch. No question of any court-martials in their ship. Yeah.
There we are.
Well, fabulous story.
Okay.
Told. Well shown.
Well, it's
Thank
lovely
you all
that it
very
has
much
such
for
a
coming.
local connection.
And I do apologise for one or two glitches, but we've been a bit short of rehearsal time because 2 weeks ago the National Health Service very kindly gave me a new knee, and that kind of put back our schedule a bit. But we didn't want to cancel because the Magic Lantern season is short. You know, once the light comes back in the evenings, you can't have Magic Lantern shows.
Oh, well done you. Gosh.